Welcome back. All right, so my continuing look at teams that missed the playoffs this year, we're going to talk about the Detroit Red Wings. Now, the overall numbers are not that encouraging, but I do think that next year, A, they'll finish above 500 for the first time in a while since the last time they made the playoffs, and B, they may very well end up being in the mix a lot longer for the playoffs, and maybe they end up above the line. So 2016, 2017, the first year they were outside of the playoffs, they had a 482 points percentage. So that's not the kind of numbers you were used to if you were a Detroit fan at the time. 2017, 2018, they dropped to 445. This was a team that had been fighting the rebuild slash retool, whatever they needed for a long time. They had mortgaged their future to try to bring in guys for the present. And they'd really been pushing to stay and keep that playoff streak alive. And I will agree with people that thought at the time it was to their own detriment. 2018, 2019, their number came up a little bit to a 451 points percentage. Then the following season, it dropped to a low of 275. And that is still the worst. I still remember watching that season, and just you could hear Mickey Redmond's frustration growing almost every game. And understandable, because he was used to watching a pretty good team, and they were making some pretty interesting decisions on the ice that led to that 275 points percentage. The following season, the number comes up to 429, so much better, and then it was 451 last season, back to where it had been in 2018, 2019. This year, their points percentage 488, which is not fantastic, but it's the best number they've had since 2015, 2016. 2016, 2017, they were at 482. So they're improving. It may just not be at the pace that people want. And that's really, I think, what the argument is how long is the Yzer plan going to take? And I'm going to answer with something that just doesn't answer that. It's going to take as long as it has to. And I agree with Yzerman on this. I agree with what he did at the deadline. I think that he's made some good calls. Of course, there's some questionable contracts here and there, but show me a GM without questionable contracts. So Larkin, back in 2020, 2021, he'll be the first player we talk about here. 44 games, 9 goals, 14 assists, 23 points. Last year, 71 games, 31 goals, 38 assists, 69 points. This year, during all the speculation on what was going to happen with him, is he going to stay? He's now the captain. Is he going to leave? Does he want to be there long term? He signs a long-term deal. And all of the discussion wasn't a distraction, didn't hurt his production. In 80 games this year, 32 goals, 47 assists, 79 points. Again, I think Larkin, really good points per game player. When this team is going to be ready to really and truly become a contender again, I think he's probably on the second line. Not because Larkin's a bad player or anything, but because depth's really important, and I think there are some star players coming up in Detroit, and I think there's going to be some more that get picked up. David Perron was a solid addition. The offense he's not producing the offense at the rate that he was, say, 5-10 years ago, but he was a good veteran leader on this team. So in 2020, 2021, playing with the Blues, 56 games, 19 goals, 39 assists, 58 points. Last year, still with the Blues, 67 games, 27 goals, 30 assists, 57 points. I will say I think St. Louis missed him this year. I think that with St. Louis falling out of the playoffs, losing Perron and others was part of the reason why. In Detroit, he plays all 82 games, 24 goals, 32 assists, 56 points. So his offense has dropped off, but it's still pretty solid. And I think that Perron gave them some solid leadership from a veteran perspective as well. Now, the two kind of golden boy rookies from last year, Raymond and Seider. Raider, you just make it Raider. That doesn't work. Raymond and Seider both experienced what you can call a sophomore jinx, right? I expect both of them to bounce back next year. So for Raymond last year, 23 goals, 34 assists for 57 points in 82 games. This year, 17 goals, 28 assists for 45 points in 74 games. Seider, on the other hand, 82 games played in both seasons. His goals dropped from 7 to 5 this year. His assists dropped to from 43 to 37, and his points went from 50 to 42. Now, there will be Red Wing fans who say, hey, that was the Ben Sherratt effect. And I can't argue that the numbers didn't get better when he got away from playing with Sherratt. And I believe that was when he was playing with Wallman that his numbers started getting better. But either way, I do expect Seider to score probably in the range of about 60 points next year. I think Raymond will be in that range too, 60, 65 points. I think things are generally going to get better. One question mark I do have with this team going forward. Do they have that goaltender that they can have faith in? Now, Husso at times was great, but he ends up with an 896 save percentage at the end of the year. Nedeljkovic ended up with 895. So while Hellberg was the guy they picked as the backup and they kept him around, they didn't want to lose him on waivers, and they waived Nedeljkovic. Nedeljkovic, honestly, had a little bit better numbers than Hellberg, who ends up with an 885 save percentage with Detroit. So I will be curious to see what Yzerman does with the goaltending this summer. Do you keep Nedeljkovic? Do you re-sign him? Do you keep Husso? Is that your tandem? Or do you look for somebody outside the organization? Does Husso keep that status as the number one goaltender, or is it going to be a 1A, 1B situation? That's one thing I'm really curious about. Now, the moves they made at the deadline I liked. First off, they acquired a 2023 fourth for Oscar Sundqvist. They acquired a 2024 first for a 2025 fourth in exchange for Tyler Bertuzzi, who has been good and bad with Boston, sometimes in the same game. But either way, Bertuzzi wasn't going to stick around in Detroit. It's a rental, so why not move him? And then they acquired a 2023 first from the New York Islanders via Vancouver. So it's the Islanders' first round pick Vancouver acquired in the Horvat deal, along with a 2023 second round pick in exchange for Philip Hronek, as well as a 2023 fourth round pick. So what's interesting with that is that, of course, Vancouver moving a draft pick in the first round is still kind of shocking to me, just a little bit. But it does leave Detroit with some options when it comes to the first round. And when you look at the number of draft picks they have this upcoming year, well, they have 2 firsts, they have 3 seconds. So they have 5 picks in the first 64 picks in what is considered a pretty deep draft. And they have 2 firsts next year. Now, there's conditionals on the draft picks here and there, but I just left it as basic as possible. The reality being Detroit's still picking up draft capital while staying competitive. And not, like, I don't think losing Hronek, Bertuzzi, and Sundqvist is the end of the world for Detroit. I think that those players are ones they can replace from within with some of their prospects, as well as they have money to go out on the market this year and improve this team and get a heck of a lot better quickly. So their UFAs this summer: Pius Suter, Ernie, Chason, Osterley, Hag, Hellberg, as well as Nedeljkovic. So the ones that I would expect to get re-signed, maybe Osterley, Ernie probably sticks around. It'd be interesting to see if they decide to keep Chason. Chason was signed, and I thought played well after being signed by the Wings. I did, but I've been a fan of Chason's because he just doesn't give up. He gets these tryouts, eventually he gets contracts, and he just sticks around. He sticks with it when other players would either go to Europe or just, I not necessarily retire, but just figure some other way out, maybe go to the KHL. But yeah, Chason, NHL. And then their restricted free agents this summer are Veleno and Lindstrom. Now, Lindstrom, I think, is a good defensive defenseman. He's not going to cost them a lot. Veleno is not going to cost them a lot either. And who's up in 2024? Well, Perron is up next year. Kubalik is up next year. Not on the board, but Kubalik had a decent year for Detroit. Now, it started ridiculous. And when it started as strongly as it did with Kubalik, well, you knew it wasn't going to stay that way. And then there's restricted free agents due next year as well. Berggren's going to get paid. I think they'd be smart to get out ahead of this. As soon as you hit July 1st, if you are Steve Yzerman, you talk to Berggren, you talk to Raymond, you talk to Seider, and Rasmussen. All 4 of these players are key to the future of this franchise, all for different reasons, and you want to get them signed to extensions. And I think the sooner in the summer you do that, the better, because then you know what your cap for the following summer is going to look like, because this summer it looks pretty good. $30,633,611 according to Cap Friendly. So this is a team that has cap space this summer. There's a lot of guys whose contracts are up. They're going to have to go out and sign players. But again, they do not have any kind of a concern. So if we get into a bidding war for some of these free agents that are going to be out there, it's possible Detroit wins the bidding war. Or that the fact that you're going to play for a team with Yzerman and it's an up-and-coming team, that may entice players to come in and play as well. There may be a forward out there who says, I'd like to play with Raymond. There may be a defenseman that says, hey, I'd be perfect to match up with Seider. So I do think Detroit's becoming a more attractive place to play. Now, still upcoming as well, Marco Kasper, who played a game at the end of the year. Simon Edvinsson, who played 9 games, had 2 goals. Elmer Soderblom. Soderblom in 21 games, 5 goals, 3 assists, 8 points. He's about 10'6", So that's going to help him in the NHL because being taller than the rink is intimidating. And Sebastian Cossa in net. And so Cossa, I believe he's getting some ECHL experience in goal right now in the playoffs. But he is seen as the dreaded goalie of the future. And I say dreaded because I'm old enough to remember how many goalies of the future haven't necessarily turned out. So there's a few contracts here that may look a little bit pricey, and I'll start with Andrew Kopp. Now his $5.625 million until 2027. He had a rough start to the season. I thought by the end of the year he was playing well, and I thought by the end of the year Kopp had probably shown Detroit fans why Yzerman went out and got him, and why I thought that was a really good decision. I have been a big fan of Andrew Kopp's game for a long time. If a player works really hard, and if they're working in the corners, and if they do so in a clean manner as well, you've got a fan in me. Sherratt, $4.75 million until 2026. And again, Sherratt, there's been some discussion about Sherratt during the season, and the fact that this contract goes on for a few more years likely won't make all Red Wing fans happy. But Sherratt, I think, can still find a spot in the top 4 or top 6 if he ends up getting moved down. So it becomes an expensive contract, but again, they can afford it. And next summer, we're going to see the salary cap jump a lot, right? So some of these contracts that right now we look at and go, I don't know how you'd move that. I don't know how you could justify that. Some of these contracts will diminish in terms of the criticism next year. And Ville Husso, $4.75 million for him until 2025. So he's got a couple years left at that cap hit. And it's felt like since they signed him that he's the goalie that's going to be there, and 3 years means that when they're expecting to be a pretty darn good team, they'll have the option of either you keep Husso if he's grown into that number 1 spot, or you can find someone else to come in and play that role for you. Detroit is not a team without holes. That's how you end up still being below 500. That's how you end up selling at the deadline. But I think Yzerman made the right call. I don't think that if they added at the deadline, they likely would have ended up finishing ahead of Florida. And it gives them more assets. Way more assets. That first round pick this year will be a good one. The lowest it can be is 11th. And again, this is a good draft. So if you're drafting 11th, you're probably drafting a defenseman, I would think. But we'll see who's available at that spot. And you're going to be drafting best player available, not necessarily somebody who's going to be playing for you right away. But if they win 1 or 2, if they win, say, Adam Fantilli, I'm going to be greedy, I'm not going to say number 1, but if they draft 2nd overall and they get Fantilli, that's a star player. So for Detroit, they're in pretty good shape, and I think they've done a good job. They also could take that Islanders first round pick, combine it with theirs, and try to move up. There's always that possibility they try to move up. And there may be a team that's willing to do it. Again, with a good deep draft class, you might look and say, we'd rather have the 2 draft picks, and we'll give up the option to pick at, say, 5th, 6th, something like that, and maybe Detroit ends up moving up. But again, it's speculation. It's fun speculation, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always, regarding the Detroit Red Wings and their future. Do you believe in the Yzer plan? Do you think he knows what he's doing, or do you question it? Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.